A lot of people tend to believe conspiracy theories. That's not always a bad thing, because sometimes they turn out to be true. But before you start believing a conspiracy theory, it's important to think critically about it. To be able to do that, it's important to know how you can recognize a conspiracy theory.
In terms of how to recognize a conspiracy theory, a good starting point, first of all, is that if it seems too good to be true, it often is. Like I said, conspiracy theories are often sensational, and they give very, very wild explanations for how the world works. So that's one way to recognize them. Then another thing that you can do is start to look at the story and the narrative. How does it work? What kinds of gaps do you find? What kinds of things do you need to take for granted and believe for the theory to make sense to you? And once you start doing that, you often realize that there are huge gaps that you somehow would have to fill in for the theory to work. So that's a very useful strategy for recognizing conspiracy theories. In recognizing conspiracy theories, also very basic media literacy skills are very useful. So looking at extremely basic things, especially online, such as who is sharing the information, what is the source, doing things like reverse image searches to find out what the origin of an image might be and whether it has been manipulated or not. And here I would also say that there is something to the large amount of numbers that we see online that is important to mention. Because a lot of the media that we have, such as the biggest social media platforms, work according to the so-called popularity principle, which means that the kinds of content and accounts that have the most interactions and reactions and followers always get more visibility. And that means that often people, when they see that a certain video or a post has a lot of likes or a lot of views, they might think that that says something about its validity. So a lot of people saw it and a lot of people shared it. So maybe that means that a lot of people think it's true as well. But that's not necessarily the case at all. There are all kinds of media literacy skills that you can train to be able to recognize things like astroturfing, which means that often the numbers that we see, the numbers of views and the numbers of shares, are artificially created by groups of people, individuals, or, for example, bots. And that means that there were no actual people engaging with this content, but it has been artificially created to get to more visibility, for instance with a conspiracy theory, and to give the idea that a lot of people actually were interested in it and perhaps also found it truthful.
If you recognize a conspiracy theory and you want to react, what can you do?
One thing that you can do when you come across conspiracy theories online is to just move on and let it be. Online environments are all about being fast and quick, and it's all about the now, and a lot of people also seem to think that they need to react to everything that they see. But believe it or not, that's not really necessary. You can just let things go and you don't have to engage with everything, or if you want to engage with things, maybe you take a little bit of time to reflect on what you're going to say. And related to this idea of moving on, you might also want to think about the fact that we live in a so-called algorithmic culture, where a lot of the things that we see online are regulated by algorithms, and that relates to the popularity principle that I mentioned earlier. All of that is algorithmically calculated. So, for instance, the kinds of things that you see in your social media feed and the order in which they appear to you, that is all sorted out for you by algorithms. And in terms of moving on, if you engage with content, that means that you're also feeding the algorithms. So it might very well be the case that if you engage with some kind of conspiracy theory content, that it only becomes more visible because you engage with it, even if you wanted to say that something that contradicts or disproves the conspiracy theory. So that's another reason why you might want to think about just moving on and not engaging with conspiracy theories online. Another thing that relates to the question of algorithms is the fact that you can find yourself in a so-called echo chamber where you only get more of the kinds of things that you've already watched before or seen before, and perhaps also things that you already believe in. So another thing that you should pay attention to is the kinds of things that are being recommended to you. That's again the work of algorithms. So based on the things that you have engaged with earlier, you get recommended other kinds of content. And it can happen very quickly that through these recommendations, you are suddenly engaging with content that maybe comes from a less reliable source than the ones that you were looking at previously, and you might not be aware of that if you're not specifically paying attention to the kind of content that you get. And also the claim has been made that if you find yourself in that kind of echo chamber, it means that you get fed with more of similar kind of content. And that means that you see, for instance, in terms of conspiracy theories, you see the same claims being made over and over again. And that might lead some people to think that, oh, but I've seen this thing several times, several people said it, I've heard it from several sources, so maybe that means that it's true. While of course it may have nothing to do with the accuracy of the theory as such.
So if after you reflected on the conspiracy theory and you decide you want to respond, how should you do it?
If you find yourself in a discussion with people who are trying to give you conspiracy theories and use them to explain how the world works, there are a number of things that you can do. Often it's useful to think about, just in general, how you want to address the conspiracy theory. So maybe you already, once the person is doing the explanation, maybe you're already thinking this is crazy and this is just completely insane and doesn't make any sense. But that doesn't mean that you have to say all these things. First of all, maybe you don't want to use the word conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist at all. So you don't need to label the person. If you need to engage with the person, it's best just to focus on the evidence, politely ask for further evidence, ask questions, or politely offer evidence of your own that you know contradicts the conspiracy theory. You might only make people angry if you call them conspiracy theorists, and that may not lead to anything useful, actually.